the Jon Top of It podcast. Welcome, everyone, to the Jon Top of It podcast. My name is John Meisberg. There's my little lower third. And today we have my guest, Breanna Wilson. She has a background in Mindful-Based Transpersonal Counseling. Breanna, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So for the viewers out there, if you're interested in this topic of working on your mental health, please like this video and share it with your friends so more people can see it. And if you have any questions about mental health, please write them in the comments and we'll answer them at the end of the episode. So let's get started.
All right.
Let's start with the first question that I think a lot of people are thinking about, which is, what is transpersonal counseling? I don't know how many people are familiar with that term.
Yeah, I think most people are like, what is that? And this is something that I get a lot. But basically, I always go back to kind of the root word. So transpersonal psychology is beyond the self. Transpersonal is beyond the self. So that starts to include anything spiritual, anything transcendent. And we're talking altered states work. We learned a lot about hypnosis and its clinical uses. I use different interventions that could be considered altered states work. And just generally being kind of open to whatever is in the human experience, whether that is like what's directly in front of them or kind of outward or in that spiritual extra realm.
Okay. And what made you interested in studying this?
I originally got into this because I wanted to go to a particular school that was offering this. I wanted to get a counseling degree from Naropa University in Colorado. And it just so happened that as I was looking at this, they had just started a brand new hybrid program, so online and in person. So I was able to mostly be here in Seattle doing the coursework, and then every other month or so I'd fly into Colorado and be with my cohort and do the in-person pieces of learning how to be a therapist. So that was a big piece of it, was going to the school, because Naropa's whole thing is transform yourself, transform the world. That's their motto. And they do a lot of like interpersonal and personal work for the people that become therapists through them. Since there's the belief there that you need to be able to do your own work before you can help other people do their work.
Sure. And that makes sense to me, but what I don't get is, like, what did you see about transpersonal counseling that was special compared to just regular counseling that most people, I guess, are familiar with? I don't know. Right?
Yeah, I think that actually comes back more to the mindfulness-based part of it. That was really a big draw, was being able to go and learn how to meditate and use meditation in my personal life and in my practice, and be able to start making that mind-body awareness connection that had been not really present as much for me, as that was really healing.
So did you find that throughout your education that you developed more of that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. If someone had asked me before grad school, hey, where are you feeling that in your body? I'd be like, what? What body? I'm not just a floating head. I don't understand. So I definitely started
so wait, what's
to
your
develop
answer now?
I mean, I have more of a sense of like, oh, like there's some tightness in my chest because I'm really nervous, or, kind of that butterflies
You feel
in the
more
stomach.
self-aware.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. So what do you currently do in your line of work? What do you do with this? Or
So-
do you use this?
Yes. So I am a therapist, psychotherapist, part-time, I guess full-time. That's the only thing that I'm doing right now. And I used to be at an agency working with kids and teens, and now I'm in a group private practice working with teens and up. So that's been a little bit of an adjustment, but it's still a lot of the same work, just now over Zoom.
Okay. I think there's a lot of people out there that probably have a counselor. They talk to a therapist. Is transpersonal counseling something that you can specifically look for in like Psychology Today And if so, like you just look for the word transpersonal in as a keyword. Is that how someone would go about finding somebody? And why could you potentially like sell somebody out there on this? Like, why would they seek out transpersonal counseling over someone who specializes in something else? Like, what would you say to them?
Well, I don't.
Or is it not a one size fits all? It's like different counselors fit different needs for different people. But I guess maybe a better question is, when would a transpersonal counselor be the most suitable for somebody?
I think that, so yes, you can search for transpersonal on like Psychology Today or Therapy Den or anything like that. When would you choose a transpersonal counselor? I think that if you wanted to be exploring some of the spiritual aspects of your life and wanted someone that you knew absolutely wasn't going to judge you and would be able to speak to those things, that would be a useful part of that, as well as if you're wanting to do more of that like mind-body work or like altered states work or trance work, like if you wanted to work with clinical hypnosis, you would definitely want to have someone that has been like certified through the big hypnosis boards and through the APA and all of that. But
I want someone to hypnotize me.
Yeah.
I mean,
interesting.
I would want somebody to hypnotize me, but also record it so that I could then watch it and believe that it's real. I mean, I guess I've seen other people do it, but it's like, I think it would be a totally different experience to watch a video of myself being hypnotized, to be like, wow, they really did do that to me, you know?
Well, yeah. So I think that's also like one of the misconceptions about hypnosis is that it's something that someone does to you. And actually, we spent a lot of time learning from the previous director of the hypnosis department of the American Psychological Association in my grad program. And he has done a lot of research and work on empathy actually being the basis of hypnosis and how it works. So like there has to be some level of that empathetic resonance between you and the person that is doing the induction or like leading you through this process. But I wouldn't say it's something that they're doing to you. You always have a choice, even when you're in a trance state.
Oh, you're saying you're aware. Okay.
Yeah.
But you're like voluntarily submitting yourself or
Right.
like making yourself open to persuasion.
Right.
Okay.
And I think some people might have different levels of that too, or levels of how much it feels like that. I'm a low hypnotizable. So there's like different stages. There's like low, medium, high hypnotizable people that are more easily pulled into or more easily going into trance state. So I am not one of those people. I don't know if it's because of that like lack of mind-body connection that I've been working on. But there's a lot of resistance in me to like being in that vulnerable place.
Yeah, same.
So
the only experience I've had with hypnosis is I think I went to like a fair one time and I saw some guy get on a stage and start pulling people from the crowd up there to like,
right.
you know, do the clock thing. And I don't know. And I just remember being like, that's a bunch of bull. But I was a kid back then. I was like, I don't believe this. But then hearing that it's used in actual therapy has made me think twice about that initial stance that I took.
Right. And people that do like clinical hypnosis definitely have a certain view of performative hypnosis because it does kind of give clinical hypnosis a bad reputation. Yeah. But I think that it's more like you could think of hypnosis as being more like guided imagery almost. Like I've done some like guided imagery meditations that have a very similar like induction where you're using like mindfulness to kind of bring your body into a relaxed state. And that's really a lot of what hypnosis is like bringing the body into that relaxed state and that trance state with you. So it's not as scary as one might think.
Yeah, I think the scary part would be letting somebody take over your mind and then putting something in there that you don't want there. But if you're working with a professional that you trust, I would imagine there is agreed upon programming.
Right.
Right.
Yes. Usually someone that's using hypnosis in a clinical setting will kind of go over exactly what is about to happen, like the types of things that they're about to say to you. They might say like, oh, I'm going to hold back a hypnotic suggestion so you're not like anticipating that in the moment, but it's going to be like in this realm of, like what we're working on. It's not going to be like, every time I say this, you're going to, clap your hands or whatever. So they're going to be very clear with you about what is about to happen ahead of time.
Okay. Is this something that you've done personally? Like you've been hypnotized, but it's just not as effective on you personally because of your walls or
right. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that there's different ways that hypnosis can affect people. And so I've done, we in grad school on each other, we administered like a hypnotic test basically to kind of determine like if you're a low, medium, high hypnotizable, like what ways are you showing up? Because some people have like visions, like visual pieces of it. Some people, there's more of like a physical sensation part of it. Some people have a really sexual reaction to it. Some people,
Whoa.
So there's a lot of different ways that people can show up in an altered state. So for me, it's just like, I feel really relaxed. Great.
What's the deal with the clock? Is this real or not? That like, if you look at these pictures, like
the pendulum.
Yeah. Why does that show up so much? Like, I feel like it's so commonplace. When I think of hypnosis, if we were playing Family Feud, the first thing that I would say, if you're like top 5 answers for hypnosis, I'd be like that clock on the rope. Like, what is that? What is that? Is that something that they use in a clinical setting, or is this just like what people think of when they think of hypnosis or hypnotherapy?
So it's not how I learned how to administer hypnosis or do that process. If I were to try and theorize about it, and I could be totally wrong, there might be something about like the eye movement that's helpful. Because like right now, something that's really big in the mental health community is EMDR, which is like eye movement desensitization. Desensitization? However you say that word.
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I had a counselor provide me the option to do that, where you follow a light bar. I haven't done it, but she was saying that it really helps some of her patients. Do you have experience with that thing, or? I
actually haven't done EMDR myself. It's something that I would like to try at some point. But it's just not.
Do you understand how it works? Here's a picture for people out there that want to see. Let's see. It looks like a gigantic Kinect light for like the Xbox.
Yeah.
Look at that thing.
And then she's holding those paddles too. And I think that those can buzz back and forth as well. So I am not 100%. I'm not trained on this at all. I don't have much experience with it.
It's pretty cool.
Right. But I think there's something about the eye movement, or like the bilateral movement that can really help our brain. Like, this is something that I use in my clients, is like the bilateral hug, where like you kind of like squeeze both sides of your body, because if you cross sides of your body, it helps your brain move out of like that fight, flight, like limbic system response and back into the executive functioning, like prefrontal cortex. So there might be something around that, where if you're talking about something really traumatic and you're like doing the light thing, it might be helping. Like, obviously you're using other self-soothing and resourcing tools ahead of time, but it might help be able to have continued regulation during that time.
Interesting. So similar to the clock in a way.
The back and forth, right?
Yeah.
That relaxation piece.
Interesting.
Right.
Wow. So much to know about mental health that I do not know.
Yeah, it's a wild, wild world. There's a lot.
So I think a great segue for us to go down is that, we're all experiencing this pandemic together this year. How do you feel the lockdown in America has impacted people's mental health?
Oh, it's really tough. I think that a lot of people are much more depressed and much less motivated than what is typical. There's a lot more anxiety, and people are feeling that that's really exacerbated because of the sense of isolation and this lack of connection with other people. Yeah.
I think partially for me, I think there is like a depression and an angst based on not knowing what's going to happen in the future as well. Like feeling like a sense of like a loss of hope of about like, you know, because I think earlier this year, I would think, if everyone gets a vaccine, everything will go back to normal. And then it's been like a whole year, and then people are like, oh, well, some people don't want it. Some people don't trust the people giving it. And even if people, like, we're not going to be able to get everyone to take it, or maybe it won't be ready in time. And so it feels like we're not out of the woods. We're not close to being out of the woods. And I think that, like, not knowing how the future is going to be, to me, is like the most depressing. But
yeah, there's a lot of factors that are kind of affecting that like uncertain future.
Yeah.
And we really don't like that. There's a lot of change and a lot of discomfort in sitting in the unknown, because it's not something that we really have to do a lot, especially on this scale.
Yeah.
Like especially with what's going on in the country politically, as well as the pandemic and like all these other things that have been going on since March. It's a lot. It's a heavy, heavy load for people, and they're coming face to face with like really the parts of humanity that we don't have to struggle with a whole lot these days.
We're not familiar. How are you personally doing? How has this affected you?
I think that there was a period of time in the beginning where I was like really enjoying just being home all the time and like wearing my pajamas and like all that kind of stuff and just kind of really chilling out. But then over time, like when that gets more monotonous, and then again, I had a similar thing with you. I was like, oh, you know, like we're going to get through this year and we're going to have the vaccine and everything's going to be fine. Like it felt like a light at the end of the tunnel. And now it's like, well, it keeps kind of moving farther and farther away.
The goalpost. Yeah. It's just like, oh, now I feel like people are talking like things won't start to go back to normal until like 2022.
Ugh. Yeah. That's hard.
Like, I don't know if I can get through another year.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Yeah. At least it seems like because... So after that point of kind of just dragging along, kind of enjoying it, and then getting kind of tired of it, and then kind of dipping a little bit, it started to become really important to have a routine again, and to engage in the self-care practices like that I knew that I should be doing, as well as like reaching out to people and making sure that I really prioritized that amount of connection. But yeah, it is tough for sure.
Something that I wanted to bring up in relation to what you were just saying is, while there are these negatives with being in lockdown where like you feel socially isolated and lonely and maybe bored or worried about the future, there's also been some noted positives for people. One is that people have said, oh, I don't have to commute to work. And so a lot of stress comes down from that, and you save time that you can then redirect towards like working out or taking self-care type practices. And then I found a few articles. One is that there was a study done that said that in the UK, mental health actually increased in a positive way since the lockdown. And then in Japan, suicides have actually declined. And I think that in Japan specifically, it's because of their work culture. Maybe like they're getting more of a break than they're used to, which has kind of been a huge plus and a wake up call that like, oh, maybe we need to like not push ourselves as hard as we were. I don't know, but it's interesting to see. It's not so black and white. It's not all bad. There are some positives to everyone being forced to take a long break from the way that we've been living, and perhaps there can be some valuable lessons to gain that we can hold on to after this is all over. What do you think? Yeah,
I think that people have really started to take a look at work-life balance and how that plays into things. I think especially in U.S. culture, there's still that drive of like making things work and like being really busy and working really hard, and not having as much time. Like you just have to do that to survive, right? And so make sure that there's food on the table and having that commuting time back. I mean, some people are commuting like an hour or more each way. That's a lot of time out of your day that now if you've got that back, you're like, oh, I can spend that with my family. I can go to the gym. I can read a book. I can, do all these sorts of things.
My bus route was a 90-minute bus route from Seattle to Bellevue every day. I did it for like 3 years. And then all of a sudden it's like,
3 hours back.
It is 3 hours. What do I do with that 3 hours? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. My husband was already working from home full time before the pandemic started. So we'd already kind of seen a little bit of that. But definitely I've heard from a lot of people that they were able to spend more time on pursuits that they never would have had time for before, like art, any sort of expression like that, getting more into cooking, more into maximizing like their physical health, or even just like spending more time like watching your favorite TV shows or like catching up with friends that you wouldn't have thought to have, like you wouldn't have had time for before.
Mm-hmm. I think that this has also forced people to learn how to embrace tools that allow you to interact with people digitally. Mm-hmm. So like tools like Zoom have taken off, tools like Discord for gaming and talking to people, just like video chatting, and just ways to interact with people in a digital way so that we aren't completely socially isolated. I think they've now become so mainstream, so well adopted, that I think that it'll be hard for companies to then come out and be like, everyone has to be in the office like all the time now. I don't think it's ever going back. I think the genie's out of the bottle.
Right. Yeah, like we can do this, so why aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And especially when it's probably going to show that, there might be some people slacking and wasting some time here and there, but there's probably overall more productivity because people are happier and they have that work-life balance, and it probably translates to, overall just better work, better productivity, better culture, better overall, just a better overall output for the company, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of people that are missing their coworkers or are missing that sense of like being able to go somewhere during their day, or, be away from their kids or whatever that case might be. Yeah. But I think that being able to have that option is really helpful. Like if you like really just need a mental health day, and you still want to get a little bit of work done, or you don't want to use PTO, or, maybe you just don't want to deal with getting into the office that day. Like, I think it's really useful to have that option. And that's something that's near and dear to my heart, and being able to work from home, from previous industries and jobs before becoming a therapist. But yeah.
Yeah, I think my ideal work week would be something like come into the office maybe Monday and like Wednesday, and then have like head down days where I'm working like by myself doing designer development work, like Tuesday, Thursday, and then Friday is like a toss-up. Like if I need to come in, we come in. If we don't, we stay home, kind of thing. But like maybe do like a 50-50 split, because there are days where when I'm working, I need to just do work, and it doesn't matter if I'm on the moon or if I'm in the like it doesn't matter where I am. I just need to work on my computer. And then there are days where like I really feel like it would be more productive for everyone if we all got into a room together and talked it out. So I think that there are, and I guess that it depends on the industry that you work in, clearly. Right. I mean, like if you work with clients, well, even if you work with clients now, everything's telehealth now. So, I mean, I guess it depends on, the industry, but I don't know. If you're introverted or extroverted, I think that might also play into how much you miss the office and your coworkers and those interactions. And I know my understanding of those terms is that even introverted people like to socialize, but they get drained quicker, right? So I see myself more of an extrovert. So I do miss people. I do miss interacting with people, but I also value the extra time I have. So it's kind of like, I don't know. I like both.
Right. Me too. I'm pretty ambiverted. Like I can go either way. And there are definitely, times when I'm happy to just stay in with my husband and watch TV, and other times when I'm like, okay, let's plan something. Like, let's, get on video and do something. Or I've noticed too that there's been more like reaching out to others. Like I have come from a place where I really hate using the phone. And I don't know, I feel like there's like this small generational pocket of people that are like, you know what, I really hate talking on the phone. Like, let's just text instead. Kind of coming from that, at least for me, coming from that place of MSN Messenger, like AOL, or like those things growing up and just not having that. Like, oh, I can just call my friend and see what they're doing. But I found myself doing that a little bit more, like, hey, like, I'm going to call you. And, if you're busy, don't answer. Let me leave you a voicemail because I just want you to know that I'm thinking about you. And, if it's a good time, let's chat. But that's a hard sell even today. So it's a little easier to plan a Zoom chat.
It is so weird. I feel like it never used to be this way. But if I call somebody, sometimes I feel like I scare them a little bit. They're like, oh, you're calling?
Right, what's happened?
I don't think people are used to phone calls. At least, and it's a generational thing. It's weird. And I guess texting is okay. It works and it lets people respond in their own time. But I think like if you're trying to have like a good conversation with somebody, having their undivided attention is just so nice. Like even like this format of a podcast, like you're here with me. I know that you're listening to me. Your attention is not divided, and I don't think that you can replicate this kind of conversation over Facebook Messenger. Like people are too distracted. They're splitting their attention. They're thinking about other things, and it's just never going to be the same kind of quality of a conversation. And it's I think at least a phone call gets closer to that.
Phone calls are really hard for me because I'm such a visual processor. Like if I think I did a test in school that was like, how do you learn? And it's like video or like visual, audio, and the kinesthetic, like hands-on. And I was like, visual was like way up here, and then it was like kinesthetic was here, and then audio was like way down here. It was so much lower. So it's really hard for me to be on the phone with someone and not be able to see them.
Yeah.
So video chatting has changed my life. I'm like, oh yeah, you want to get together for this? Just pull me on in.
And I think that with this, what's it called? Facebook rooms, messenger rooms. See this
I
thing?
haven't played with those yet.
It's just so easy. Like you literally just click like create a room, and then you select the friends you want to talk to, and then they just all pop up. Like it's just like we've had Google Hangouts for a while, but it's not really connected to a social media platform. And I think that's what was missing is like you can just like I have a bunch of siblings. I'm one of 6 kids, and so like the idea of being able to just like select all your siblings on Facebook and your parents and hit like Facebook room, and then like boom, everyone from around the country is just there on your laptop or your phone. I think like that it couldn't have come at a better time to have this type of technology during a pandemic. I've actually tried doing a podcast interview with somebody over Facebook rooms, but I didn't like the way that the camera was split. I'll have to play with it more. But yeah, tools like this and Zoom, and yeah, I'm grateful that we have this stuff, because otherwise it would be more socially isolating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it can be maybe a little bit. I like that there's so many options. Like there's so many ways to do that, because if your friend is like, oh, I only have Discord, or like, oh, I only have Zoom, then there's a lot of
you can always
ways
shift to
do
something
it.
else.
Right. Yeah. It's like, oh, you have a Facebook, I have a Facebook. Let's do that instead.
Yeah. So I think a common theme that I've noticed that we're talking about is self-care, and reaching out to your friends and family and getting that time with them. I think that's one form of self-care. What would you say are some other forms of self-care?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, self-care can be really dependent on the individual, but I think there are some general things that apply all around. Really, I mean, some people are like, oh, I want to draw myself a nice bath and read a book and light candles and just really make a nice night for myself. Some people are like, I want to go on a run. Some people, their self-care is watching like crappy reality TV for a little while and kind of being able to zone out. So
my
really
life
depends.
is so much better than theirs. That's how I feel better.
Yeah. Or just even that, just I don't need to think about this. Like it's someone else's problem, not mine right now. Like it can be when you're intentionally like using those types of tools, like even distraction or kind of like, like zoning out from what's happening can be useful if it's in a finite time. And you're aware like, oh yeah, I'm doing this thing on purpose.
I think a big form of self-care that I've been trying to do lately that I'm really bad at is drinking enough water. Because I've been told that if you don't drink enough water, you feel dehydrated, and that leads to like headaches and all kinds of physiological symptoms that I experience all the time. So water break.
Yeah, that's a good plan. I found that for me, my biggest return to self-care is exercise, because if I can get up in the morning and do like a 30-minute workout, I am drinking more water because I'm, sweating and thirsty. And then I eat breakfast at a normal time, and I like go shower and get dressed and like have like this start to my day. And just obviously the physiological mental health benefits of exercise are really there, like getting those brain chemicals moving and
Yeah, and I think maybe for a lot of people, the main issue is carving out that time to practice self-care. Like people, I think most people know the tactics, the things to do to practice self-care, but what they are maybe struggling with is making sure that they give themselves the block of time to do it. And I've read online that like if you can, to like go to sleep earlier and wake up earlier so that you can have like that hour in the morning to like dedicate it to you, like you time. And then it's like you're starting off the day, you've already you've done your workout, you've gotten a good shower, you've meditated for a little bit, you've done these things, maybe you do a gratitude journal. I was reading that like writing down things you're grateful for and things that you can, positive affirmations, like things that you can just do to, or maybe just get like a healthy breakfast, like things you can do to start off right, so that then the rest of your day it's like you've set a good tone. Right. I think a lot of that comes down to habits and habit building. Like our brains are kind of at a certain point they become a series of habits. Like I've noticed just how much that a certain environment or a certain sequence of events can trigger. Like if right now I'm trying to not eat as much sugar, so I noticed that's hard.
Yeah, totally, absolutely.
Especially when you have like a lot of people in your life that are always trying to like give you stuff. You're like,
you're like, I love that you're baking, but I know that you're giving this to me because you don't want it in your house. So, that has definitely happened.
No, for me, it's they want to have the experience with you. Like they're like, let's have cookies together or ice cream together or whatever, and it's like it's a shared experience. And then if you don't participate, you like bum them out.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, that's hard. But I think that what I was noticing that is like if I am like sitting in the same place while normally, like if I've developed a routine where we like sit on the couch and we'll watch a show at night and we'll eat ice cream, then if we're trying to cut out the ice cream but we're still sitting on the couch and watching TV, my brain is like, oh, I really want ice cream. Yeah. And then it's
something's missing.
Exactly. So then it becomes about like changing that environment or like changing that sequence of habits that leads up to that thing that you're trying to now make a new habit around, which is not eating ice cream.
Yeah. Or replace it with something that's like similar but healthier. Yeah. Like, I don't know what that would be. I knew an ex-girlfriend's father, what he would do is he would do shaved ice and then like low calorie something on top. I think that was like his alternative to losing weight. It's whatever you got to do. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Right.
I was going to say one of the things that I know about you is that you foster kittens, cats. And would you consider that a form of self-care, like your experience with your pets?
Oh, definitely. It was so, I haven't done that before. And so we fostered like a pregnant mother cat, and then she ended up having, well, she had 7 kittens, but 5 survived. And so having 5 kittens was an experience. I've never seen kittens that small before. I've never seen a kitten any younger than 8 weeks. So seeing them from birth on, and like I had to cut some of their umbilical cords and like really helped out with that to some degree.
Oh, here's a pic. I found a pic.
Oh yeah, there they are. The little tiny nuggets. Yep. We actually ended up adopting 2 of them. The black and white one on the right, and then the one that looks like black with the white face that's on top of everyone else.
What are their names?
So the darker one, he's actually a tabby. You just can't tell as much here. His name is Mystic, and then the one on the right is Pepper.
Ooh.
But that was a lot of energy. So, and it was like a project, right? Like that part of the self-care was like having a purpose or a meaning. So I would like get up and I'd be like, oh, I got to like go do their cat boxes, and I have to make sure they all have food, and I've got to like clean up this. And it gave me like a routine and a schedule.
Yeah.
To adhere to, as well as just being able to see them like learn their first steps and like be in the world and learning about new things was really fun too. So
You were mama cat.
yeah, exactly. It's like she and I, Mama Cat and I, we were a team.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that that's good. I can relate in the sense that I'm a new father and trying to raise a baby, and it's very interesting. I think that like on one hand, yes, like I like that it's provided my life some structure where like I have to make sure that I'm doing all these things for him, and it kind of, I don't know, in a way that I'm glad that I had that thing to do. On the other hand, though, thinking about what I was saying earlier with carving out like time for yourself to practice self-care, I feel like I've been kind of poor. I haven't been doing that very well because I feel like I have no schedule.
Right.
Like I wake up and then it's like my life has been dictated by what's going on with him. So I don't know what kind of advice you could say to me, or like what I would do differently. I think it's just more so just like whenever I have free time, like whenever he goes to sleep, I try to do the things for me that I know I need to do. And so just trying to be more flexible with my schedule personally. Yeah. But maybe you experience something similar with the cats, in that like, today you told me that one of them had to go to the vet. And so it's just like prioritizing this life that you are taking care of, and having to having that intertwine with your own priorities, and trying to figure out how do you get everything done.
Well, I think that what you're doing is honestly what I'd say is just there isn't a way to make a set routine or be able to have that kind of certainty in your schedule. I think just fitting it in when you can, or being able to kind of take a look at the places where you might be able to fit in, 1 minute of deep breathing, or, if you're doing dishes, like how can you have like a mindful moment with even dishes, or like spend that time like listening to a song that's really uplifting for you, or like how can you bring in those pieces of self-care into other places that maybe you wouldn't normally have them, but it just becomes essential to find a way to like fit those in.
Self-care during doing the dishes.
That
Right. Sounds like an oxymoron.
Yeah.
I guess it's like what you're thinking about while you're doing it. Like,
right. Like if you're singing, or if you're dancing, or if, like I kind of mentioned the mindful moment, like something that if I'm finding that I'm having a hard time fitting in time to meditate, or I'm just feeling really resistant to it that day for whatever reason, like being able to just like feel the water on, because a lot of mindfulness is really about like what is happening in the present moment. Like, what is it like to be a human right now, like in every form? So for me, that's like, what does the water feel like on my hands? Like, what is that temperature like? Like, what is the texture of the dish that I'm touching, or like the soap, or, you know, what are the feelings that are coming up in me as I am like finishing cleaning a dish and it looks really nice and there's some satisfaction there. So being able to take that time to just be really present, even if it's just with a dish.
So I understand what you're saying, but what would you say are the benefits to being that conscious of what's happening? Like, I'm sure this probably relates to a lot of people out there that, like, for example, when you eat a meal and you're watching TV, you're not really thinking about how does the food taste?
Right.
What are the textures of the food? How does it smell? Like, what does it look like? I think all of those things, for probably a majority of people, if you're sitting in front of a TV, which I think a lot of people do when they eat their meal, it's like you miss out on all of that. And is that important? I guess when we're talking about mindfulness, it sounds like it is, but I guess what would you say from your perspective? Like, what would you say are the benefits of being mindful of what you said, what it's like to be a human, to sense these things?
From my perspective, I kind of mentioned the mind-body connection earlier. And so being really present starts to help forge those connections a little bit more, like understanding like how emotions live in our bodies, how those affect us, like what is the wisdom of the body that's maybe not making it to the brain because we're so distracted with other things. And just being able to like notice those changes in yourself. Like if you check in with yourself in that way often and you're really present in that moment, like not only are you able to kind of appreciate the things around you a little bit differently or more, like with the food example, but you're able to really start to know yourself in a different way where you're like, oh, like I am noticing that versus earlier, like my shoulders are really, really tense. And I was not aware of that until I took a moment to just check in with, oh, how is my body in this very moment? Or, you know, how are my emotions? How are my thoughts?
Is there any value in being distracted ever?
Oh, yeah.
So it's like you're not an advocate of always being mindful, but there are certain times where there is value in it. Is that what you're saying?
I think that as a practice, having mindfulness be a part of your daily life in some capacity, I mean, ideally there would be, you know, I think that the research shows that even just like 20 minutes, 3 to 5 times a week can really alter your brain, and how, I don't know, like much more grounded you feel at any given time, or like how much less your emotions can fluctuate, that more steady feeling in yourself. So, yeah.
Trying to think. I mean, I get a lot of value personally out of being mindful when I am, well, I don't know. I guess I conflate the term mindful with meditating. Is that the same thing where you are, well, I guess being mindful is like consciously directing your thoughts towards what's happening, whereas meditation would be just sitting there and allowing whatever thoughts to arise. I guess there's some similarity, but some difference to that.
Well, I would say that for me, because the way that I meditate is like mindfulness meditation, like I guess I'm kind of bringing that experience out of meditation into action. Like you can kind of bring that observational mind to things that you're doing. As well as if you're just like sitting in meditation in that moment and just being really curious about what's arising, and like noticing the sensations of your body then too. I think there's a lot of similarity, just with the focus of your meditation is your breath, typically, when you're in mindfulness meditation. Whereas then I guess you'd be switching the focus of your meditation to like the thing that you're doing, to the action. So for me,
Okay.
there's overlap.
In mindfulness meditation, if you have a thought, you're supposed to redirect your your thought back to the breath, even when the thought arises, do you acknowledge the thought and then you go back to it? You're like, okay, I had the thought, but I want to think about my breath again. Is that kind of like the practice?
Yes, and some people will name it, like they'll be like, oh, that's a worry, or like, oh, that's like, it's a passing thought, or
what's the benefit of naming it? Is it like saying like, I am aware that you are something that is like negative or are you trying to assign like a value judgment to it, or what's the point of that?
I think it's more of the acknowledgement piece of just saying like, hey, brain, like I see you're trying to bring this thing to my attention right now, but I'm kind of busy. So like I'm aware that you're worrying about this, and right now I'm in this present moment, because anytime that you start to go into your thoughts, you start going into the past or the future as opposed to what's happening right now.
I think what would be hard for me when it comes to mindfulness meditation is I would struggle to let the thought go, because maybe I want to explore it in more detail, and I think that I'm never going to remember it. And so perhaps do you think it's acceptable? I mean, you can do whatever you want, but I wonder if people maybe have like a pen and paper, and like the thought comes up, they write it down, and then they go back to the breath, like just so they can capture it and like address it later. Because I think that's my biggest defense mechanism to letting the thoughts go, is I don't want to lose them if I think that it's something I need to explore further. And then the temptation in meditation is to then keep exploring it instead of going back to the breath.
Right. I think if you know that about yourself and you're saying like, oh, like I really cannot let this go because I absolutely do not want to forget it, then I think writing it down would be absolutely fine.
Yeah.
I think that would be a useful tool. And for me, like I think of it more of like, if it's really important, it's going to come back. Because a lot of the stuff that comes up in those quiet moments will sometimes recur. I think it depends on how quickly your brain moves on from different topics. But for me, I'm kind of able to let it go that way. But if it was really important and I was like, I really want to journal about this later, or I really want to spend a lot of time like introspecting on this, I would write that down.
Yeah. So that's some good advice. Is there any other advice you would give to viewers out there that are interested in practicing mindfulness meditation?
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of misconceptions around mindfulness meditation, like I get told a lot, like, oh, I can't clear my mind. Like I can't stop my thoughts. There's no way. And a lot of people are kind of blown away when I'm like, well, you don't have to, you don't have to like stop everything that you're thinking. It's more about kind of taking that observational seat and being like, oh, look, there's a thought, and not becoming attached to it. And just really like focusing in back to the body sensation or back to that focus. Or even I suggest trying walking meditation, or even some sort of movement, because for me, starting out and sitting meditation, really difficult.
Yeah, it's really hard for me too.
But walking meditation, the way that we were taught, we move really, really slowly. So there was actually something about like moving my body and being super aware of my leg going from one place to the other, and then shifting balance, and then balancing on one leg as the next one was going to the ground. Something about that made it really, really easy to be present with the movement as the focus, as opposed to the breath. And that was a way for me to be like, oh, wow, like I actually was really present with that, as opposed to thinking about everything else.
I've actually, I swear by it, I feel like my best thoughts, all my eureka moments come from going on a jog, going on a run somewhere, or sitting in, and I work in adult learning, and one of the things that we talk about is this concept of focus versus diffuse mode, and that like your brain is usually in focus mode trying to accomplish something, and then like there are certain things that we do like sleep or meditation or exercise that your brain slips into a different mode called diffuse mode, where it's trying to like make sense of everything. And I think it's like a form of self-care is allowing you time for your brain to do that. And I think that in a society where we're not sleeping enough, we're not carving out time for meditation, we don't have we're too busy for exercise, like all these things, you're not letting your brain defrag like a computer. It's not getting a chance to defrag your hard drive, and so everything's jumbled up. And I think that's a huge part of self-care is making time for that diffuse mode.
Right. Like doing versus being is like another way to look at that too. Like the acts of doing or just being, having a balance of both, I think, is really useful. And if you're just doing all the time, then like you were saying, there's not a chance for your brain to kind of get that rest or to really integrate anything that it's been learning, or have a chance to even like look at like, oh, what do I need for self-care? Like, how are you going to know that if your brain is in like doing mode all the time?
Yeah. I saw this graphic that I think is relevant to what we're talking about. It says mindful versus mindful.
Yeah. Learn
to be present and enjoy the moment. I struggle with this though, because I have ADHD and I've got a lot of thoughts. And yeah, meditation's hard for me. I still struggle with it. I struggle with wanting to do it. I know there's value in it, and it's hard, but it's still hard for me to want to do it. But I'm definitely trying to prioritize it more. So many people have so many good things to say about it, and I just wish I stuck with it more. Would you say that meditation is something that you practice like on a regular basis in your own life?
Not as regularly as I'd like to. Like, I think I also struggle with some of that, like wanting to do it or making the time to do it, which is why I kind of focus more on how do I build mindfulness into other things that seem less daunting than
dishes.
Right. Yeah. That seem less daunting than just like sitting in one place for 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But it's something that I also understand it's like a practice, like it's something to do. And so when I am able to give myself some of that like self-compassion, like, yeah, I see you really don't want to do that. Like, yeah, I get that. That's okay. We can sit in that spot and maybe I won't get 20 minutes of meditation in, but maybe just the practice of sitting in that spot for 20 minutes and, occasionally being like, oh, okay, like coming back to my breath. If I'm able to do that a few times, then that's, better than not trying at all.
Yeah.
So even just giving myself permission to sit there for 5 minutes and think about whatever, might be filling my brain before being like, okay, let's turn inwards for a moment.
So for our viewers out there, question, how do you practice self-care? Comment below and we will read any of your comments that we get at the end of the podcast. So let's switch topics to this concept of inner child work. This is a concept that you're familiar with as somebody who practices counseling and working on mental health. I'm not familiar with this term. What does inner child work mean?
So, inner child work is kind of based off of the theory or concept that each of us carries our own childhood self with us. Because in childhood, we develop so much of how we respond to like conflict or trauma or anything like that. Like, we are so adaptable and so set for survival that when we're kids, we develop all sorts of great like habits and coping skills and things to like help us through that time that we end up kind of having to unlearn as an adult as we start being like more in charge of our own like lives and ways of being that we don't have when we're kids. So then there's this idea that we have, so like for me, like maybe my inner child will pop up in times when I don't feel like I'm good enough or like I'm about to go into like a shame spiral. Like that for me is like my inner child coming up and being like, whoa, like we're not safe here. This reminds us of being a kid and like not being in control or like not feeling good enough. Like, let's have a reaction to this. Like, let's, throw a tantrum or let's shut down or like whatever that childhood coping mechanism was to deal with stress or trauma or conflict. those will come up even in our adult selves because that's just the way that we've learned to deal with things. So inner child work is being able to work directly with that inner child for what they need in that moment. Is it like soothing? Is it like, safety? Is it, just being able to have that part of yourself be seen and acknowledged.
So it's not about trying to change it. It's more about just recognizing who you became in your formative years and working with it. Okay.
Right. Like self-nurturing. Like there's even like a style of therapy called, I think, reparenting, that is around like being your own parent that you, in that way for that inner child.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I've never thought about being my own parent before, Breanna.
Right. Well, I kind of mentioned this like guided imagery earlier, and I found this guided imagery like meditation that was all about the inner child, and you actually went through this piece of like you went back to your childhood home and you like looked for your inner child and like found where they were. And if they were, in distress, you like comforted them, or like you told them like what you appreciated about them and like how they got you to this point. And then you brought them back into the present with you, and like kind of showed them what your life is like. And, you have this it seems maybe a little silly, but you have this conversation with them where you're like, well, you're safe now. Like I see you, like I am in charge of the situation. Like you don't have to worry about you having to deal with this because I've got you. Like I've got your back, kiddo. So I think that can be really powerful in a lot of ways. Like if that's something that you were looking for as a kid and weren't able to find that.
You're basically finding ways to self-soothe yourself. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. It's just another way to get into that.
So this is, in a way, it's another form of self-care because you're like your own cheerleader.
Right. Cool.
And then another term that I think you mentioned to me is something called parts work. Is that correct? What is parts work?
So parts work is, I guess, somewhat similar to inner child work where there's this... I think that sometimes people become really identified with their self. And so part of my theoretical background is that like reality is an illusion and the self, capital S self, is an illusion, right? Like it is a construct that we have built over time in order to like keep ourselves safe and then survive and, move through life. So being able to, I think for me, like I can get really caught up in like, this is the kind of person that I am. And then I'll make choices in line with that. But with parts work, what we're saying is this is part of who I am. And, sometimes we might need to work with that specific part of ourselves, like the part of myself that doesn't want to meditate, like that's a part of myself. That's not all of me. Like the whole person, don't want to not meditate. Like there is a part of me that also wants to meditate. So when we deal with parts work, we're going to deal with the part of ourselves that want to meditate versus the part of ourselves that don't. And sometimes like facilitate a conversation between them or like really kind of dig into like what purpose both of those parts have for being.
So what is the benefit of like parsing it out and like saying that it like compartmentalizing a portion of yourself? What is the benefit of framing it that way for yourself? What would like why do this or why say it that way?
Right. For me, I think that it comes down to like not judging yourself or like accepting yourself and all of the parts of you that are there. So being able to say like, oh, I have this part of myself that I'm not proud of is really different than being like, I'm not proud of myself or like I feel shame about this thing. So I'm going to like really separate myself from that. As opposed to if you refer to it as a part of yourself or like know that it is a part of yourself, there's, I think, at least for me, I found that it's far less shameful because there's that guilt versus shame. Like guilt is feeling bad about something you've done. Shame is like feeling like you are wrong or like you're bad or,
Perhaps people are more open to working on it if they don't identify completely with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I can see that. Man, I might start using that somehow.
Right.
That's a good mental trick. Yeah.
Yeah, I think of it too. So there's a couple things that I'm starting to branch off a little bit. Because one thing I think is really interesting, that is that people used to not think that their thoughts are their own. It's like this theory of the bicameral mind. And when we kind of became aware of our own thoughts belonging to us, versus I think early humans used to think that the thoughts in their head were voices of different gods.
Yeah. That might still be true.
Right.
I don't
who knows? We don't know, but we've developed this concept of self. And so now we have ownership over these thoughts. But going back into parts work helps us again, kind of detach from like every single thought in our head becomes a value judgment about who we are as people. And, I forgot the second one. There was another piece of that. But,
in relation to what? Parts work?
Yes.
Well, all I can say is I've given up a long time ago trying to figure out where my thoughts are coming from.
Oh, the mind parlor. That was it.
Yeah.
Like, I think that sometimes too, like this applies to emotions as well. And so I've kind of theorized in my own mind that sometimes when it comes to accepting emotions and not attaching to them, I think of it like a foyer or like a parlor where all of your emotions are welcome to be there at any given time, but you get to decide who you let into the house, right? So you can go into the parlor and you can be like, oh, hey, like, what are you doing here, shame? Or like, what are you doing here, fear? And you can kind of interact with them, but they don't have to follow you into the main part of your house. You can kind of choose whether to invite them while still acknowledging that they're all there and they can come and go as they please into that space. But you don't have to attach to them.
And that allows you to have more control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is a beautiful thing. Wow. That's so weird. That's so wild.
Yeah.
You're not allowed in my house anymore. Interesting. I feel like this is a podcast episode that I'll probably benefit a lot from personally with going back and watching it again, because these are concepts that I would like to, like I was talking about with meditation, like write them down and explore them further. I think that you could probably, like, I know we're kind of probably just touching the surface of some of these topics, but there's a lot more to learn on how to maybe incorporate them into your own life. Another topic that you mentioned to me that maybe you wanted to call out from your perspective is the differences between community mental health and private mental health. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that I used to work at an agency, which is community mental health. And that is, so I worked at an agency where we saw people that had Medicaid, so that we were working with people that wouldn't otherwise have access to like private therapists and needed a place to be seen. And so one of the great things about that is access. Obviously, like people that need access to therapy, they can find it. From the therapist or clinician side of things, like it means just a lot of hours, a high caseload, a lot of burnout, because there's just such a high need and there's just not enough professionals to fill that need, or there's not very high pay because it is like in community mental health. So there's a big difference there as far as like workload and even being able to like work with your clients in the way that you want to, or that you have capacity for. So they talk so much about self-care because burnout is such a big part of community mental health. I know that was certainly starting to get to me, and part of the reason why I shifted into a group private practice, so that now I have far less clients and I have far more capacity to like really be present with them, versus kind of getting that burnt out feeling. And I really enjoyed all my clients in community mental health, and I miss them a lot and hope they're doing well. But yeah,
it's definitely
it's
more
hard.
of a mental burden.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I can't even imagine, like I left shortly after the pandemic started and we all kind of moved to Zoom calls. I can't imagine having been doing that with that caseload this whole time.
Yeah.
Especially with that population, as you work with some of the younger kids too.
And unfortunately, that has to affect the quality of the counseling. If you're burning out, if the counselors are feeling burnt out, like it has to show up in how you're interacting with them, I would suppose, in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like the same conversation happens with like teachers and having too many students, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Very similar.
So what can be done about that? Just more, like the community mental health centers need to be run more compassionately towards the counselors, or what do you mean?
Yeah, I think that there's multiple things. Is that depending on who is running the organization, that can be a big difference. Like if you have like someone that's been a therapist and has been doing this, that is, running things, then that is a very different perspective than someone that is coming in as someone that knows how to run a business or a nonprofit. And so that can change things. I think funding is also part of that too. And I know in community mental health, like there are contracts with the government that are kind of restricting in how care is delivered versus how money is compensated. So
it's just unfortunate though that somebody would somehow receive care that may be less of a quality in any shape or form because they're on Medicaid versus they have the money to pay for private care. Like it would be, in an ideal world, people would be able to receive good care from a counselor that isn't being overtaxed, regardless of whether they are financially, they have enough money to pay for it or not. I don't know. It's just, it's a goal to strive for in society.
Yeah, it's a big bummer. And I think even too, like the amount of turnover that happens because, clinicians will stay for a year, maybe two, and then they'll move on. And so that means that people that are in therapy for that length of time, like they might have gone through, if they've been there for a couple of years, they might have gone through several counselors in that time, because it's hard to hold on to counselors when they're overworked and underpaid and all of these things.
Which is damaging to progress in the sense that a lot of clients need to feel safe in order to open up, and that takes time, right?
Especially when working with kids and like younger populations. Like there are people that I worked with that it took me almost a year until they were like, oh, like I'm feeling okay opening up to you. And it was really heartbreaking leaving and having them be like, yep, it's going to take me a while to open up to someone else. Now I feel like I just started to open up to you. That was really heartbreaking.
Well, hopefully the situations with community mental health can improve over time. Okay. Another topic that you wanted to bring up with me is your thoughts on psychedelics and mental health. What's your take on this?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research going on right now in the realm of using like psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, MDMA, and ketamine as just kind of the top ones right now in the therapeutic space. I actually applied for a psychedelic therapy program that was being run between Naropa and MAPS. And MAPS is, I can't remember what MAPS stands for. I don't know if you want to pull that up at all. But they are an organization that is doing a lot of the studies right now with different types of psychedelics and therapy. So I was really hoping to get into that program.
Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
Yes. So they are all in this. They're running studies all over. And it seems like they're getting a fair ways with it, since they're developing this program for people to come and learn how to use psychedelics in therapy. Now, it was a very popular program, and now wasn't a great time to go because they were just really full really fast. So hopefully maybe someday I'll get to learn more about that. But it seems like it could be really useful and intense, because when applying for that program, they said, hey, are you willing to be with your client for 8 to 12 hour sessions? Because obviously, like if you're administering like MDMA or acid, anything like that, LSD, then you're going to have a whole journey, like a whole trip. And if you're using that therapeutically, then your therapist would be there with you for that whole time. And I think that what's really promising and useful about that is a lot of the opening qualities of these different types of drugs, like, and the way that introspection changes. So like some people might experience LSD and have like a really existential experience and feel really universally connected. And we've seen studies using that in like terminally ill patients that have a lot more acceptance towards their upcoming death after experiencing something like that.
I have an article that's relevant to that. There was a CNN article that recently came out that said 1 dose of magic mushroom drug reduces anxiety and depression in cancer patients for long term, not just like something that helps for the short term, but for like 6 months to a year out, like still like transformative effects.
Right.
So this is serious business. Like this is stuff that's like has real medicinal value.
I think they also said, I've seen articles about ketamine also being really useful for depression long term, where other antidepressants haven't been able to have that type of like long term after effect, from one dose. But yeah, and I think that MDMA is being used for PTSD, and I think that is really useful and heart opening as well. It's such a different way that people look at their lives and their bodies and connect in like thoughts in their brain, like when in those altered states. So, since that's part of transpersonal psychology in some way, that altered state work, that makes sense that that's something I'm very interested in knowing more about.
So maybe we can get into a little bit of how your perspective on how this works. So maybe we could start by me saying how I think it works, and I'm probably wrong, but I mean, my understanding would probably be that like drugs like mushrooms and LSD allow you to gain more access to maybe thoughts you've suppressed that then you could process, whereas maybe drugs like MDMA help with the trauma associated with those thoughts so that you don't have a wall up, or it's some kind of self-defense mechanism so that you're able to deal with it without the pain and suffering of thinking about them if they're traumatic. And I don't understand how ketamine works at all.
Yeah.
But that's my basic understanding. What would you say? Or is it way more complicated than that probably? But how do you explain this to like people who are, there's probably a lot of people out there that are just like, these things are illegal, they've been illegal, there's no value. People who use these things, like there's just so much negative stigma attached to illegal drugs. And so I think it would be good to be able to explain this, like the mechanisms of action to people so they understand how it's helping people in a therapeutic setting.
I wish that I knew more about the mechanisms of how it works. That is not something that I have deeply studied at this time.
That's fine.
But I think too that part of what I hear from people and from personal experience that is really useful is I think that many drugs kind of bring this theory of the self being an illusion to light, because I think in a lot of those spaces you aren't as attached to, your identity in that moment. So, even as far as people on LSD and mushrooms, maybe even experiencing what they call ego death, which is, exactly what it sounds like, the death of the ego.
I mean, I can personally say that I've experienced through psychedelics this feeling of interconnectedness with everyone, that we're all connected somehow. And I didn't know what that meant, but it felt truer than anything I've ever felt. Like, I knew it was true. I just didn't know why I felt it.
Right.
That's just weird.
Yeah, like that universal quality is really huge, as far as being able to not fear other people as the enemy so much, or to be able to have more empathy for other people, or even to have more empathy for yourself, like in context of that. I think that that's also a big part of it, is kind of that stepping outside of yourself and being able to like look in without that emotional reaction or attachment.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of value in that can translate into a therapeutic setting. Something else that I wanted to bring up, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there is this app that Paul Stamets created. He's a mycologist, and it's called Quantified Citizen. And I recently just had a friend do this. They have a microdosing study where you anonymously participate with this app, and you like answer questions and play games that are like tests, and you submit all this data over a 90-day period of microdosing psilocybin mushrooms, and they're gathering anonymous data from like across the world from all these people.
Wow, that's so
like
cool.
They're just doing their own study, and I don't know, I think this is so cool. So anyone who's out there, I wish they had an Android version. They only have iPhone right now, but I don't know. I think stuff like this is so cool.
That is super cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
But.
And I love that it's kind of like, it's the anonymous study. It's being done by, identifiable sources. Because I think that a lot of research these days is you have to be really careful about who funds it, and like kind of knowing what the potential biases are going into it. So being able to say like, hey, like here's the people we're running it, here's why we're running it, here's where the data is coming from. I think that's a different kind of study than maybe some of the other studies we see often.
Yeah. And I think the problem is like your average person probably doesn't know how to detect between something that is valid and something that is not. It's a problem, especially in I think we're still living in the wild west of the internet, where like anything can be posted, anything can be shared, anything can be anonymous. I don't think it's going to be this way forever. Maybe not in our lifetime, but but I hope that will lead to a world where we have a way to figure out what is the truth and what is a manipulation. But I guess I don't know how we're going to get there, but hopefully we will eventually. Well,
how do you figure out what is the truth in a world where there are so many truths, right? Because that comes back to, again, the piece of reality is an illusion, because like there has to be an agreed upon reality that people come to, since everyone is bringing their own reality and their own perceptions of the world to the surface.
Yeah. It's a good point. That's another podcast.
Yeah.
What about this? So when it comes to learning more about psychedelics and mental health, are there any resources that maybe you would recommend to viewers out there that are interested in this topic?
Definitely MAPS is a good one. I mean, I think that there's a lot of there's
I'm just
a lot of older research too, but MAPS I think has got the edge on the current.
Gotcha. I just think there's probably a lot of people out there that probably think man, I would really benefit from psychedelic therapy. Where can I go to do this? And then the answer is probably nowhere yet, right? Or like there isn't a whole lot of options.
Yeah, there is. I don't know if this is easily searchable or not, but there are people that do psychedelic therapy currently. I don't know how it works, and I don't know how they're able to do it.
Do a Google search.
Yeah, but there are people that are doing it in some way or form right now, if that is something that people want to look into.
I have a book to recommend that I listened to the audiobook, but I really like this author, Michael Pollan. He wrote How to Change Your Mind, What the New Science of Psychedelics Teaches us About Consciousness, Dying, Addiction, Depression, and Transcendence. And this is a really good read.
Yeah.
So definitely check this guy out if you're interested in the topic, because I think that it's going to make a big difference in people's lives when psychedelics become more mainstream and commonplace with in conjunction in like a therapeutic setting in therapy, because I think it lets people let down their guard. It lets people trust their therapists a lot quicker and open up to them more, which I think allows the healing to occur and allows them to like get their thoughts out and make sense of them. So I think there's a lot of good there if it can be supervised by a professional and keep them feeling safe and comfortable throughout the process. Because I guess some of the pushback would be, well, what if they have a traumatic experience, a quote unquote bad trip? Like, how do you keep that person safe and comfortable and be able to rein it in? God forbid it becomes out of control. So I don't know. And there's a lot of propaganda out there around those types of drugs that I think people maybe are going to go into a therapeutic session with those maybe thoughts that are about what it's going to be like. And then that somehow negatively impacts the experience, you know? Like, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's what the professional is for, or even, people that do this recreationally, why they have trip sitters, is people that are able to kind of change the environment or be able to like distract you or like talk you down from those negative thoughts, like introduce new sensations or things. So I think that being able to, but I mean, I certainly think that that's got to be part of the training, is to be able to figure out like, what are those ways that are helpful to people that are starting to have a bad trip, or are starting to go maybe down a more negative path, versus, yeah.
Yeah, I think MAPS actually has a whole guide on psychedelic crisis counseling, because I actually had somebody on a podcast a year ago on psychedelic crisis counseling, and he worked for the Zendo project, which partners with MAPS. Yep. And so this is all very familiar to me. So yeah, if you're interested in this, check out MAPS and what the Zendo project does. They actually have a tent at Burning Man, and they do psychedelic crisis counseling there because it's much needed.
Yeah, it's like going to Shambhala, and they've got like people on staff that are available. They have a safe space that's available for people. It's very non-judgmental. You can go, and yeah, I think that's wonderful resources for people to have. Yeah.
And then our final topic, you wanted to talk about something called an Enneagram. And this is something that I've never heard of before. I'm familiar with a Myers-Briggs personality test, but this is something similar but different?
Yeah, so I'm kind of a nerd about this. Like I've spent a lot of time with it. And so one thing about Myers-Briggs that is really interesting is that I would say that I am an XNFX, because no matter how many times I test, my E or my I or my J or my P are so close to 50% that they change at any given time.
Oh, so you assign it an X to mean I'm in the middle?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I can go either way at any time, but the only consistent part is the N and the F. the intuitive, and the feeling. And so I just thought that was kind of interesting that from any given time in this personality test, I could be an INFJ or an ENFP or, any combo of that.
Why do you think yours changes? Or do you think that it's normal for it to change?
I think that, well, again, it's just how close to the middle you are, like that. Like for me, I said I was pretty ambiverted, so I can go either way on that. And then the judging and perceiving, I think just over time, it really depends on the situation. So I'm fairly in the middle there as well. So
some people are closer to the middle, and some people are, if you're like farther to one side, then you're probably going to get the same result every time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And then it'll be more consistent then. Whereas if I take Myers-Briggs when I'm feeling really extroverted and energetic and like open to the world, then I'll probably test as an ENFP. And if I take it later that day and I'm feeling like burnt out or like, emotionally exhausted or whatever, then I might test in as an INFJ. So for me, like, I don't love that flexibility. Like it's kind of nice to know that about myself, that I can go either way in these areas. But for me, I think that there's a piece of like the Enneagram typing system that accounts for people's, how they change throughout their life. First of all, like how they move towards like growth or integration versus how they act when they're absolutely stressed out and they're kind of in that period of disintegration is how they refer to it. So in Enneagram typing, there's 9 types. So in their numbers, so it's a little bit strange. Like, oh, like I'm a 2. And then, so they're each very different, and then they're broken up. So the Enneagram is like the shape, right? I don't know if we can pull up a picture of that. Yeah. So that interesting shape that you can see there is the Enneagram. And there's all of these different triads that they're broken up into. So like there is 3 numbers that are part of the feeling triad, 3 numbers that are part of the thinking triad, and then, I can't remember what the third one is, but they're all broken up like that. And there's also, they're broken up into different like base emotions.
Okay. Anger, fear, and image. Is that what we're talking about? These 3?
Yes. And image, like I've usually seen that explained as shame.
Okay.
Like self-image maybe is more of that. So yeah, like 2, 3, 4 is part of the shame triad, and then 7, 5, 6, 7 is fear, and then 8, 9, and 1 is anger, are kind of those base emotions that people work out of. But it ends up really differently because, so 9 is like the peacemaker. Like they're the people that are super conflict avoidant, and they just like want to help people and have things be really harmonious. So it's really interesting that the base emotion is anger, because you wouldn't think that when you met that person. So being able to notice the difference between like what that person's base emotion that they're working out of is interesting. And
so I guess I don't understand. So like when you say their base emotion is anger, but they're a peacemaker, are you saying that anger is what they normally feel, or is anger what they're afraid of experiencing? Or like, what do you mean?
I think both.
Both.
I think that maybe for 9s, like that feeling of anger, like they don't really feel like they're allowed to feel it. And so it comes out in like, let me make peace here, because I'm not allowed to feel anger, even though I have so much anger here. Like this is how I deal with that anger. Whereas 8 or 1, they're a little bit more externalizing with that.
Okay. So I understand that this is compartmentalized into 3 different chunks between anger, fear, and self-image. But what are the arrows again? Did you talk about that?
Those are the arrows.
Why are they numbers connected?
Yes. So those are the arrows of growth or integration and stress or disintegration. So you'll notice that. So there's 2. If you notice, there is an arrow going from 2 to 4, and that's a black arrow. So that means that when 2s are in periods of growth, or they're like maybe what they would say as particularly healthy in moving towards their goals and so on and so forth, they act more like 4s. They become more individualized. They become more romantic. They become more creative and expressive. Whereas you'll notice that the red arrow from 2 is going to 8. So then if you're in a period of stress or in disintegration, you might start acting more like an 8, who is more of that like more aggressive type. Yeah.
So when if you're a 2, if you're a helper, if things are going good, you're more like a romantic artist, and when things are going bad, you're more like a boss leader.
Right.
Is that what it's saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. So that's where it flexes a little bit in like how you show up at any given time that the Myers-Briggs doesn't necessarily have.
Interesting.
And the Enneagram also likes to look at, like when you do the testing for it, they typically ask you to answer the questions as like your child self, like before you've kind of put into place coping mechanisms and stuff. So what is a good example of this? If you were to ask me, when I was a kid, like what my reaction to being rejected on the playground is, my reaction as a kid would be like, I would go cry about it. Whereas, like right now, if I get rejected on the playground, I would be like, oh, that's
whatever.
Not as big of a deal. Yeah. Like I would have ways of being like, yeah, that hurt, but like, I'm okay. Like I don't,
Yeah.
So answering those questions from that younger place might give you more of a look into what is kind of the base before the adaptation skills.
Mm-hmm. So what is the point of it's just a better way to know yourself, but then what do you do? I guess what would a person do with this information?
I think that knowing kind of the base, so again, to like if you like look at the literature from Riso and Hudson, who've put this out, they'll kind of give you like base desires as well and base fears. So again, for 2, like the base desire is like I want to be loved, and the fear is like I'm not going to be loved. So like knowing those types of things and like looking more into the ways that how you are, I guess, or how you show up in any situation can really help you to be intentional with working with those things. Like you can bring these types of things into therapy and be like, oh, like I like totally freak out when I feel like someone doesn't like me, or, when they're going to abandon me. And like, here's how this is as part of my background and how I've come to be.
Yeah.
So being able to see those things about yourself, I think is really useful. And it kind of comes back around to like using archetypal ways of looking at the self in order to promote healing as well.
Interesting. So basically it's like knowing yourself is important. It's an important prerequisite to effective working on yourself. It's like you need to know like how do you operate and who you are, and that's like part of your part of the important information that you bring to therapy. And maybe some people start therapy and are like they don't even have answers to those questions, and then everything takes longer because you still need to figure those things out.
Right. Or even just how to determine like how you feel in any given time, or like why you react to things the way that you do. Like that can be a lot of work that ends up being done in therapy if that's not something that comes naturally to you or you've been taught how to do previously.
So for the viewers out there, I'm sure they're thinking, I want to take this test or something. Like what can people do if they want to know like is their number, or their number?
I would say that you could go to the Enneagram Institute website, and you can either look through all the different numbers and see like what resonates, or if you Google Enneagram personality test, you should be able to find a test. I believe that the one that's done here, when it says take the ready on the bottom left, I believe that is a paid test. But there are...
It looks like it's only $12.
Yeah, so if you want to go through the Enneagram Institute, that's a way to do that.
Considering the other personality tests that I've seen online, it's actually pretty cheap.
Yeah, definitely, comparatively.
Yeah.
But there are places that you can find it online for free as well.
Oh, okay.
Or if you want to pick up a book, like usually most of the books will have the test in them as well, and then you get all the added benefit of like getting really deep into how this was theorized and like what it means about your type.
Why do you think Myers-Briggs is so much more mainstream than this? What causes one to take off more than another? Because I've just never heard of this, that's all. And I always hear people be like, oh, my Myers-Briggs is this. I mean, it just seems so much more commonplace.
I wish I knew the answer to that. I mean, I think that there's something about it.
Is it something you thought about?
Yeah, like as far as, I think that why it's so mainstream is because it started being used corporately. Like people started using personality tests within companies in order to help make more cohesive teams or be able to help each other figure out how they work to work better. So I think that is part of why that's come more into like the mainstream opinion versus other personality typing. And this one is complicated too. Like I really only scratched like the very, very top of that surface because we didn't even talk about wings or instincts or anything about like how much deeper that can go. So it's just not as easy to explain, I think, and requires an amount of introspective that's not really useful in the corporate world.
I see. But it doesn't mean that there aren't better systems out there. It's just that sometimes simpler maybe gets adopted quicker, or it scales better.
Or the things that you learn are more useful to the workplace, right? Because if you're just on the Myers-Briggs, you're learning if you're an extrovert or an introvert. You're learning if you're like more in like the way that you get in information is like more intuitive or more like sensing. Is that what the S is? And then like feeling versus thinking, and then judging versus perceiving. Like those are all things that relate to like how you are how you do in the world versus how you be in the world, I guess.
Gotcha. Okay, so do we have time to answer a question from the audience? Is that cool? So Liv Hausman writes, what would you suggest for people that have time for self-care but have trouble feeling motivated to want to do it?
Yeah, that's really tough. And I think that can be one of the biggest like barriers to self-care. And certainly when you're in a pandemic and motivation feels like it's at an all-time low, people are kind of dealing with that, I don't know. For me, at least, it feels like a sluggishness. And the way that I've dealt with that is I'm really resistant to routines. I don't like routines. It's not my favorite thing. I like to be a little bit more open with my schedule, but having some kind of a loose routine is really helpful in being able to like build in self-care. Because like I said earlier, if I like get up and I exercise and then I shower and I meditate and I eat breakfast, like these are become part of my sequence of events that leads to a new habit. And so I think that part of self-care, that if you're struggling with motivation to do it and it's not something that you want to do, building it into a series of habits might be useful, because then you don't have to want to do it necessarily. It's just something that you do habitually. So if you can build it into other things that you are going to be doing or that you want to do, that might be a way to like build that habit as well.
Okay. Well, Breanna, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
How can people reach you if they have any questions related to mental health?
So if you've already seen this on Facebook, you can reach out to me there. I also have a Twitter account at Tiger Oddity. You can reach out to me there. And feel free to ask me any sort of questions if anything wasn't clear, or if you want to know more. I'm happy to answer any questions or point you towards other resources.
All right. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Till next time.
Bye.